The State of Donor Confidence. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the fundraising school, and I'm delighted to welcome back Rick Dunham. He is the founder and chair of Dunham+Company, an international fundraising firm that works in the United States and around the world, and also is closely associated with the Giving Institute. Rick, former board chair of the Giving Institute, and his firm conducts a lot of research for the Giving Institute. And he and I first met through our school's work on Giving USA. And Rick, what a delight to have you back with us.
Really delighted to be here. Thank you.
All right. As the new year dawned, you came out with the study on donor confidence. Before we get into some of the findings, can you just give us the parameters? What type of work was occurring to gather these data?
So we had done what we wanted to do was to field something post-election to try to get a sense of what donors were thinking and feeling. So it's a national survey, about 1,500 donors who had given at least $20 in the last 12 months to charitable organizations. So that's kind of the data set.
And 91% of them said they would continue donating. What was your reaction to that number? On one hand, we hear from Fundraising Effectiveness Project and others that fewer than half of donors will continue donating. This finding is at 91%, which sounds spectacular. And also, though, compared to some of the other surveys you've done, was a little bit down. What's your analysis of that finding?
Yeah, so I think the donor intent to continue to support organizations has always been fairly high. It's always been in that 90, 91, 90, I think it peaked at 94% a year or two ago. But I think the general sense that I get is that donors do intend to continue to support the organizations that they care about.
And as they do so, what did the study find in terms, are they going to give the same amount? Were they thinking they might give more? They might need to give less. What did this study reveal?
Yeah, so, and we consistently ask that question because if they are going to continue to give, we want to understand what's the trajectory of that giving. So what was encouraging in this study is that it scored about the highest that we've had since 2020, at 79% saying they're going to be giving the same or more, with only 14% saying they were going to be giving less. So I think that was the first hint that a bit of a buoying of donor confidence coming into the new year.
And how do those findings compare? You've been doing this survey now about 5-6 years annually. Yeah. What do the trends show in that regard?
Yeah, so the low point was in 2020 when we did the survey right on the heels of the pandemic hitting, and only 66% of donors back then said they were going to give the same or more and people just didn't know. I mean, there was so much confusion at that moment. But that improved in 21. Jumped all the way up to 80%. And then it stayed in that mid-70 range. 23, it went down to 70%, but it's gone back up now to the 79% level, for which we're pretty excited. We think that's, again, when we fielded the study, there was a sense that you saw the confidence of donors increasing coming into the new year.
And that is great news for fundraisers. Again, 91% of donors saying they're going to continue in 2025, 79% saying they'll give the same amount or more, only 14% expecting to give less. And that same and more percentage and that give less percentage are some of the best findings in the last 5 years. And of course, Rick, that leads to the question, why? You talked about doing this study this particular time around in the wake of the national election in the United States. And of course, a lot of states electing governors and so on and so forth. When donors are saying, yes, I'm confident, and yes, I'm going to give and maybe give the same or even more, what are their motivations for doing so?
I think one of the findings that was interesting to me was a stronger belief in economic improvement in the coming months. So I think as donors project, and I think I go back to 2020 on this, when the pandemic hit and we did the survey, there was so much uncertainty about what that meant that confidence level really dropped to 66% about save or more. Well, in this particular survey, the confidence in the economy was higher as they looked forward. And I think as a result of that, that's what I think has buoyed the sense of donor confidence in giving the same or more.
And what did this survey also find in terms of the relationships donors have with the nonprofits? So the election happened, people have their views on the economy, but they also gave you some information about our giving decisions are going to be based on what we're hearing from nonprofit organizations. Can you
Yeah,
expand on that,
so that
please?
was, and I think that was a really important finding is that the strongest motivator for that giving was what the needs of the charities themselves. So what that says to me is I then go and pivot to the charities and their communication with donors and how critical it is both to keep the case for support in front of donors, but to make sure that that cadence of communications is consistent enough to keep those donors engaged.
So, yes, there is the wealth effect of giving based on someone's view of the economy and how things are going. But as fundraisers, as Rick said, we need to continue to keep that case for support in front of our donors. Stewardship, the fundraising that happens in between making the asks, needs to stay
Right.
persistent. And that's confirmed by this study as well. And Rick, I would also want to point out, too, for our audience that for those who said, oh, I might not donate or I'm going to donate less, it wasn't about the nonprofits, it seemed. It was about some of these economic conditions. Am I reading that
Yeah.
correctly?
And that's pretty consistent is the number one reason people say they're going to give less is their personal financial situation, which is not a surprise. I mean, that has been a consistent top reason in all of our studies. What kind of peaked up for the first time a few years ago was inflation being cited as a reason for giving less, and that hadn't happened in years. And what I found interesting in this study is that actually the percentage of donors who said they're going to be giving less, inflation jumped up a little bit again as one of those rationales or reasons for that. So I think generally it's the obviously personal financial situation, the economy in general, but I'm seeing inflation once again, be a concern for donors.
Yeah, and Rick, I've been persuaded by the viewpoint that, inflation isn't just this economic number, but it's also psychological,
Yeah, I
as we
totally
record. Yeah, please expand upon that.
Yeah, and I just think when the greater the uncertainty in the mind of a donor about future economic conditions, the less likely they are to make these commitments. And I think, again, I go back to 2020, we saw that in spades early in 2020 when the pandemic hit, is donors just really pulled back because they didn't know. Everything was so uncertain. But when things settled and there was an infusion of money into people's bank accounts towards the end of 2020 into 21, boy, donor confidence soared. And I think people felt much more confident in being able to give.
And to the extent that, again, some folks, 14% in this study, say I'm going to give less, if at all. We know our school's research shows empirically when the inflation rate is at 5% or higher, we can see that correlation with the decline in charitable giving. And as Rick and I record this interview, the inflation rate is below 3%. But again, it gets back to that psychology. I'm still thinking inflation. It's still creating that uncertainty. I'm still wondering. And of course, we had so much inflation so quickly. People remember, not all that many years ago when the pricing situation was different. So it can play havoc with some of our donors.
Yep, absolutely.
You also take a peek at generations. And I know your firm also has come out with a much more extensive study on generations and their charitable giving. And we let our audience know we'll have Rick and his firm back to take a deeper dive into that research. But there is a glimpse here in terms of what you're seeing in terms of generations, the boomers, then on to Gen X, and then millennials, and then Gen Z. What did this study find?
There's been this consistent pattern that we're picking up post-COVID, post-inflation in particular, where the millennial generation has been giving at a higher level, the average household income being higher than Gen X. And we went back and did a little bit of a calculation looking at some of the public data on household income, et cetera, and looking at some of our data in terms of what people stated as household income. And what we found fascinating is that the millennial generation actually gave 18% more in the previous 12 months than Gen X, even though their household income on average was $23,000 less per year. So that says a lot to me about future giving and the millennial generation. I had a question recently about how does that mirror boomers at kind of the same stage. It's really hard to go back into the annals of history and take a look at that. But I did uncover some data from early 2000s. And what I'm seeing generally when you do the math on the whole thing is that millennials are kind of echoing what boomers were doing at about the same stage. And so I think that, to me, that bodes well when you think of the millennial generation and how large it is. The fact that they're showing such levels of generosity already, to me, it's hugely encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And, from a financial standpoint, Dean Twing at University of Pennsylvania has noted that today's millennials, compared to when their parents were in that millennial age, actually financially, many of them are doing better in terms of home ownership, in terms of income. And now they are forming households through marriage and partnerships. They are bringing kids into those households. They're buying houses. All of these things are predictors of charitable giving, and it's showing up in your data. Boomers still leading the way.
Yep.
Now millennials ranking second on that list. And as our colleague, Dr. Michael Moody, points out, he wrote the book Generation Impact with Sharna Goldsecker. Millennials are poised to become the wealthiest generation in U.S. history with their own earning and what they could inherit.
Wealth transfer, And I'm glad you brought that up, because the other thing is, you and I, we hear a lot of times organizations say, well, my donor file is older. And I would say, frankly, that's a good thing. My question is, knowing the amount of wealth that the boomer generation represents, how effective are you in planned giving? Because that is the opportunity that's huge.
And Rick, we just expanded to a new planned gift fundraising certificate here at the fundraising school. Excellent. For that very reason, to give people even more training in that area. A couple other topics from this study on donor confidence are the vehicles, including what we're seeing in terms of generation. So now 70% of your respondents said they're giving online, but some folks might be a little bit surprised at the response on which generation is making the most online gifts.
Yeah, so that's the boomer generation, which to me is probably makes sense, because they're probably at that level, at that generation, and probably pretty settled in their giving habits, and are probably just giving more frequently. And especially when you look at the amount they're giving compared to the other generations. But what I also find fascinating, and I think actually super important, is a continual increase in the use of a mobile phone to make a donation. And I think that is super critical for organizations to understand, is that you've got to make sure you think first about the donor experience and their ability to make a gift to you, and that everything must be mobile first.
Need to be on those smartphones and give the donors options in terms of their online wallets and all the different types of ways that they can give. And yet, almost all of your respondents say, you don't mind receiving some direct mail from time to time.
Well, the younger the generation, the more they want direct mail, which is super funny. Yeah. But I've anecdotally just asked some of our younger employees, and go, yeah, we never get any mail. So it's great when something shows up. So, but they do show that they want more frequent communication from charities they support, and they do love direct mail. They just, when they respond, they're going to go online to give that gift.
Right. Great point. And anecdotally, same thing. When we have people identify as millennials in our courses, they say, yeah, I'm a digital native and my work is all online, and don't mind seeing an envelope with my name on it and hold a piece of paper in my hand from time to time. Yep. So it all comes together. Rick, every time we have you, I just always enjoy any type of summary advice that you might have. You're working here in the United States. You have clients around the world. As you summarize this study, what advice do you have for fundraisers?
A couple of things. One is, don't ignore the potential of the boomer generation to, frankly, we're in the middle of helping. I would say we're close to 10 organizations right now with capital campaigns. Don't just be mindful. Over 90% of wealth is held in assets, not cash. And that wealth is being held by the boomer generation. And just think both in terms of capital campaigns as well as planned giving. That generation represents great opportunity. The second thing I would say is we're seeing very consistently in the data this migration, ongoing migration to almost all online giving. So making sure that the website is mobile optimized, making sure that the experience there is easy and super simple. What you don't want to do is frustrate a donor who might get a direct mail piece or an email from you, and then they go to give, and it's difficult for them to do that. So those are probably the two biggest takeaways for me.
And donors having a strong wave of confidence heading into 2025. And we need to continue to stay in relationship with our donors as we continue to acquire new donors for our good work in the philanthropic sector. Rick Dunham is the founder and chair of Dunham+Company, working nationally and internationally, doing a lot of research associated with the Giving Institute and associated with the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, in which resides the fundraising school with our college's work on Giving USA. Rick, I always learn something new when we're together on the podcast. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Bill.
This information guides our work with our 25 public courses. We're in 10 U.S. cities, including Austin, Texas, not too far from where Rick hangs out on a regular basis. And we are also online in the United States and anywhere across the world. We have custom training. We have quarterly webinars, these weekly podcasts, and all of our information gathered in our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising. Make sure you get the 5th edition. This information is available online at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. I'm grateful for our producers today, Mike Anthony, the Emmy Award winner, and my colleague Jennifer Boffman, CFRM. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. Now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.